Heard every week on the amateur radio bands all around the world, broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the United States, and one of the first podcasts on the Internet. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the Earth as we come to air with edition number 1390 of This Week in Amateur Radio. The FCC announces its intent to delete minor Part 97 rules and regulations. We will tell you what ones are affected. Hundreds of amateur radio operators assist in the running of the 2025 Chicago Marathon. Copper theft at broadcast and internet facilities are high on the FCC's list for action. Ofcom in the United Kingdom implements more amateur radio license changes. The International Amateur Radio Union urges the inclusion of amateur operators with disabilities. The ARRL Year of the Club website contest is announced alongside of the club newsletter contest. We will have all the details. DXLook introduces personalized band condition reports. The Grimeton SAQ alternator will be on the air soon with a special United Nations Day message. The launch of Amazon's Kuiper satellites is finally successful after many weather-related delays. The United States and Australia sign a space-related memorandum of understanding. The BBC announces plans to terminate Radio 4 long-wave transmissions in 2026. And a military satellite that was launched 56 years ago has been moved, but nobody knows by who or why. We will have this mysterious story for you in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Ben Shop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio will present an amateur radio story entitled When Your Hobby Revolves Around Electricity. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with an encore presentation of a century of amateur radio. This week, Will takes us aboard the Wayback Machine to the early 1920s. As vacuum tubes were making CW practical, they were also making voice transmissions possible. Experimental broadcast using radio telephone, or just phone to hams, began as experiments by amateurs and some of the wireless telegraph companies, including Marconi and DeForest. This week's episode is entitled Radio Telephone. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Sawyers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio here just outside of Albany, New York, where the weather is getting a little bit warmer, but we're definitely in fall, I'm George, W2XBS.
And reporting this week from Cortlandville, New York, and my ham shack, where the cat who lets us live with him decides to always lie on top of my HF amplifier, apparently because it's warm. I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from our studios in Naugatuck, Connecticut, where we're expecting a severe nor'easter tonight and tomorrow. We're really battening down the hatches here. I'm Steve Sawyer, K1FRC.
And reporting from our news bureau in Sandwich, Illinois, where I just finalized the programming of my radios for the Chicago Marathon, I'm Jordan Kurtz, Kilo Echo 9, Bravo, Papa Oscar.
From the Churchville, New York Bureau in the Finger Lakes region, where the mornings are brisk and the apples are plentiful, this is Ron, W2ELS.
And reporting live from the warm and humid Space Coast in Florida, I am Ed Johnson, W2PH.
And reporting from central New York near the southern shore of Lake Ontario, where we're certainly feeling a chill in the air, this is Kilo Charlie 2, Oscar X-Ray Juliet.
And reporting from our New York News Bureau, where it doesn't feel like snow yet, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our amateur radio outpost in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where one of the Halloween decorations at a local farm features a wood chipper on the lawn with a dummy human leg sticking out of it. I'm Don Hulick, K2HEJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where autumn has finally made a stormy appearance, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
As part of a much larger overhaul focused on deleting almost 400 obsolete wireless regulations, the Federal Communications Commission has announced plans to delete or modify 4 minor provisions of Part 97. The ARRL's Washington Council has reviewed the proposal and agrees that the deletions are obsolete and will have no impact on today's modern amateur radio service. One of the deletions was suggested by the ARRL as part of an earlier FCC request for public input on rules ripe for deletion. The proposed regulatory changes are: delete Part 97.27. This provision relates to the FCC's right to modify station licenses. The Commission rationale for deletion is that it duplicates Section 316 of the Communications Act. Its deletion will result in no substantive changes to the right of the FCC to modify a station license. Delete Part 97.29. This provision specified the procedure to replace paper licenses. The FCC stopped producing paper licenses at the end of 2020, having implemented a system that allows any licensee to download license originals using the password-protected area of the FCC's ULS computer database system that is web accessible. The ARRL proposed deleting this section in comments filed earlier this year. Delete Part 97.135, Subpart B, Paragraph 2. This provision grandfathered HF amplifiers purchased before April 28, 1978 by an amateur radio operator for use at the operator's station, and also grandfathered those manufactured before April 28, 1978, for which a marketing waiver was issued. The applicability of this rule has long passed. Delete Part 97.521, Subpart B, and Appendix 2. This rule and appendix related to volunteer examiner coordinators regions, which were based on the traditional amateur radio call sign areas. The FCC no longer limits volunteer examiner coordinators to regions, and there is no reason for doing so given the nature of remote exams. Direct final rule proceedings such as this are limited to rules that are no longer applicable because they have sunset by operation of law, govern an expired event, regulate an obsolete technology, regulate virtually a null set of FCC licensees, regulate an outdated market structure, or otherwise are no longer used in practice or otherwise in the public interest. The deletions will become effective 60 days after publication in the Federal Registry, unless the Commission finds that the adverse comments filed within 20 days of publication raise significant issues that merit additional consideration. The ARRL will continue to engage with the FCC in the regulatory and rulemaking process as part of its mission to promote and protect the art, science, and enjoyment of amateur radio, and to develop the next generation of radio amateurs.
Amateur radio operators serve the communities across the United States in many ways, before and when all else fails. Here to tell us how amateurs assisted in this year's running of the Chicago Marathon is John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Using their skills as communicators, their personal equipment, and the amateur radio service, the hams provide a needed boost to public safety radio systems. The 47th Bank of America Chicago Marathon, held on October 12, 2025, featured 55,000 runners from around the world. And for the 17th year, a team of 155 amateur radio operators from 6 states assisted the 2,000 medical personnel volunteering for the event. 100 ham radio operators were stationed at each of the 20-course medical tents and 1 medical hub. Lead medical communications spokesman Rob Orr, K9RST, said ham radio is important to the event, but it is just one small component to a very complex event that requires 10,000 volunteers to be successful. Ham radio has a unique role and works alongside the other specialty service groups required to support an event of this magnitude. We are grateful to the hams who have shared their expertise, their time, and resources over the years. The event has shown the public, the city officials, and the runners that ham radio is very much alive and doing well in Chicago. I'm John Ross, KD8I DJ.
Amateur radio operators were partnered with the medical teams to help coordinate responses, arrange for resupplies, and provide situational awareness for the organizers. About 60% of the amateur radio teams come from local clubs, and they train their own people. There are 5 local radio clubs that have repeaters in tall buildings throughout the city to help reach some of the far ends of the course, but also deployed were 5 portable UHF repeaters in Grant Park and in other select places where there was a real need for backup resources. Organizers wanted to make sure every team had at least 3 ways to reach the forward command tent in Grant Park. They supported the medical teams and communicated the request for transport, supplies, or other course-related information using traditional radio channels. In the forward command tent, the hams had 10 net control operators and logging specialists. For several years, the automatic packet reporting system has been used to track some of the medical personnel in the Grant Park area. This has been a useful tool since the post-race scene is crowded with thousands of runners and friends. APRS was also used to help locate patients, medical teams, and amateur radio operators.
We all know how precious copper can be in our antennas and elsewhere in our shacks. Our broadcast colleagues know it too, and have suffered in recent years from vandalism and theft involving copper. And, as we have reported in the past, it has taken them off the air. One FCC commissioner recently called publicly for tougher responses from the agency. As you know, there's a growing epidemic of attacks on communication sites, and the responses needs to include sharper federal penalty and more sophisticated preventative actions from the industry, according to the newest commissioner to join the Federal Communications Commission. Olivia Trusty, who was confirmed to the agency in June, called on telecom companies and broadcasters to fortify their sites with tamper-proof housings, cameras, and alarms, and said the government must likewise step up the penalties for the theft and vandalism. She made her remarks in a video presentation this month at the Telecom Industry Incident Management and Prosecutorial Collaboration Summit in California. The past few years have seen a number of high-profile copper thefts in the United States, disabling internet and television services and even knocking broadcast stations off the air. For some radio stations, the results was tens of thousands of dollars worth of damage. Trusty noted that in some instances, the 911 emergency services was disrupted by similar attacks on telecom sites, with the United States Department of Homeland Security calling communication systems a top infrastructure sector. A bipartisan measure has been introduced in Congress to address these concerns. It is known as the Stopping the Theft and Destruction of Broadband Act of 2025 and was introduced by a Democrat and Republican lawmaker with support from the industry. We will keep an eye on this story and bring you updates as necessary.
Ofcom, the regulator in the United Kingdom, has moved ahead with phases 2 and 3 of changes announced earlier that affect amateur radio licensees. These actions follow those made in Phase 1 of February 2024, which adjusted power limits and expanded operating freedom. This month, hams with intermediate call signs have the option to replace their number 2 series call prefixes with either an M8 or M9, and can either retain or replace their existing suffix. These are voluntary changes at the moment, but in 5 years, the regulator will change all the remaining call signs. Ofcom is also limiting license holders to a single personal call sign and will be revoking all but the one chosen to be kept. Hams are also getting the option to change their call signs every 5 years. Other changes include those affecting special event stations, can be found on the online version of Ofcom.
A club website can keep members informed of news and upcoming events, keep them interested between meetings and activities, teach them about ham radio skills and technology, or even make them laugh, remember, or set an operating goal. The sky's the limit. As part of ARRL's Year of the Club celebration in 2026, ARRL wants to see your club's website. Enter the club website contest for the chance to have your website honored in QST. Here are the rules and requirements. The club website contest is open to ARRL-affiliated clubs that maintain a club website. Submissions must include a completed club website contest submission form, which asks for information about your club and its website, as well as a 500-word statement on the purpose or goals of your website and how the features and configuration of the website fulfill the club's purpose and goals. Part of the judging process will include a comparison of your statement with the website itself. Winners will be notified in May 2026, with awards presented at Huntsville Hamfest in August 2026. Winners will be announced in a 2026 issue of QST as part of ARRL's Year of the Club celebration. The QST article may present material from the 500-word statements supplied in the winner's club website contest submission form. Please note that winners may be asked to supply high-resolution files of specific website pages. The submission deadline is Friday, January 30th, 2026 at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Please note that once you send your submission form, you may update content on your website as needed per your club's normal operation, but you may not make significant changes to the site's structure or functionality until April 1st, 2026.
As part of ARRL's Year of the Club, ARRL is hosting a club newsletter contest. With more details on this exciting new contest, we go to League headquarters where John Ross, KD8IDJ, files this report.
The club newsletter can keep members informed of news and upcoming events and keep them interested between meetings and activities, teach them about ham radio skills and technology, or even make them laugh, remember, or set an operating goal. The sky is the limit. ARRL wants to see what your club does with the mix of information that can go into a newsletter. Enter the club newsletter contest for a chance to have your newsletter honored in QST. Here are the rules and requirements. The club newsletter contest is open to ARRL-affiliated clubs that have published a newsletter for at least 1 year. Submit PDF files of 1 year's worth of consecutively published issues, no gaps there, ending with your most recent issue. If your newsletter is monthly, submit 12 consecutive issues. If your newsletter is bi-monthly, submit 6 consecutive issues. And if your newsletter is quarterly, submit 4 consecutive issues. Publication dates may span 2024, 2025, 2026 if necessary. Submissions must include a completed club newsletter contest submission form, which asks for information about your club and newsletter, as well as a 500-word statement on the purpose of your newsletter and how the newsletter's contents and design fulfill that purpose. Part of the judging process will include a comparison of these statements with the newsletter samples. Winners will be notified in May 2026 with awards presented at the Huntsville Hamfest in August of 2026. Remember, the submission deadline is Friday, January 30th, 2026 at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. More details are available at arrl.org. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Once again, the publication dates may span 2024, 2025, and 2026 if necessary. For example, if your newsletter is published monthly and the September 2025 issue is your most recent publication at the time of your submission, send us all 12 issues from October 2024 through September 2025. Do not send additional issues once you have submitted 1 year's worth of issues. Winners will be announced in a 2026 issue of QST as part of ARRL's Year of the Club celebration. The QST article may present material from the 500-word statements supplied in the Winners Club newsletter contest submission form. Please note that winners may be asked to supply high-resolution files of specific newsletter pages. And again, the submission deadline is Friday, January 30th, 2026 at 1600 Eastern Time.
One of the greatest challenges of amateur radio ought to be getting a rare DX, logging an all-time new one, or mastering a new skill or new operating mode. It should not be the act of trying to get on the air itself. To ensure that radio amateurs with disabilities have the same chance at all other challenges and adventures, the Program for Disabled Radio Amateurs in International Amateur Radio Union Region 1 is encouraging a celebration on and off the air to reflect ham radio's welcoming spirit. This event will take place on December 3rd, which the United Nations has declared to be International Day of Persons with Disabilities. In an announcement about the program, its coordinator, Riri Azrak, OD5RI, encourages ham radio societies to plan awareness events, nets, or special events using a special call sign incorporating the letters PDRA. Hams are also being urged to identify and support radio operators with disabilities or persons with disabilities who are seeking their license. He wrote, "Together, we can demonstrate that amateur radio truly belongs to everyone, regardless of physical or sensory ability."
The ARRL Foundation is accepting grant applications from amateur radio organizations for eligible amateur radio-related projects and initiatives, particularly those focused on educating, licensing, and supporting amateur radio activities. To grow amateur radio's future, youth-based projects and initiatives are especially encouraged. The ARRL Foundation Grants Program accepts proposals on a cyclical model 3 times a year, in February, June, and October. Proposals for the October grant period are accepted through October 31st. Awardees will be notified approximately 1 month after the closing of each cycle. The ARRL Foundation carefully manages a portfolio of endowments in which donors have provided specific goals for their gifts, and that portfolio is invested and managed in a way that it can continue to support those goals for many years to come. Additional information and a link to the grant application can be found at www.arrl.org/amateur-radio-grants.
A grant from Amateur Radio Digital Communications has brought good news for 7 fire stations in Boundary County and an underperforming antenna in the North Idaho repeater group. The $9,394 in funding will help the Boundary Amateur Radio Club, Whiskey 7, Bravo Foxtrot India, to install new radios and power supplies at the fire stations and replace the antenna on Black Mountain, all part of a necessary upgrade of obsolete equipment. Club board member Dan Parent, Kilo 7, Zulu Foxtrot Romeo, told the Bonners Ferry Herald that the radios were already 15 years old when the club received them as a donation from the railway 15 years ago. He went on to say that they can't be programmed. One of them doesn't work, but those radios were deployed at each of the 7 main fire stations. He told the paper that the club can also install a better antenna at Boundary County Hospital, shoring up a necessary connection between radio operators and the hospital in an emergency.
DXLook, the real-time HF propagation and reception platform used by amateur radio operators worldwide, has introduced a new feature, personalized band conditions. This update enhances how operators understand HF propagation by tailoring band condition estimates to each user's specific grid location, rather than relying solely on global indices such as SFI, A-index, or K-index. And DXLook now provides location-aware predictions that consider geographic position, local time, and atmospheric factors. Global space weather numbers are valuable, said Rodrigo Varquez, creator of DXLook. But what matters most to operators is what's happening right now at their own QTH. Personalized band conditions bridge that gap. The new system recognizes that propagation can differ greatly between regions. For example, auroral absorption at high latitudes, heavy static noise in tropical zones, or nighttime delayer changes at mid-latitudes. By factoring in these local influences, DXLook offers more relevant, real-world guidance for operators planning contacts. The feature is now available on DXLook.com and integrates seamlessly with the existing band condition widget. For more information, visit DXLook.com.
On October 24, 2025, SAQ is scheduled to air a message to the world promoting peace, unity, and global partnerships. The unique Alexanderson alternator is scheduled for 1 transmission over the antenna on VLF 17.2 kHz CW. The Grimeton radio station welcomes all visitors to attend the transmission. To attend one of the transmissions in the transmitter hall, a ticket will be required. See grimeton.org for complete visitors information. SAQ transmission schedule is as follows. 1320 UTC, the live YouTube broadcast begins. 1330 UTC, startup of the alternator. 1400 UTC, transmission of a message. In 1924, the construction of Grimeton radio station in Sweden was completed and the two transmitters, invented by Ernst F. W. Alexanderson, was put into commercial operation. The radio station call sign was SAQ. SAQ is the only remaining pre-electronic radio transmitter that has been preserved and is still functional, even though only one of the original two transmitters remain. There may be some test transmissions preliminary on October 23rd between 1300 and 1600 CEST. During the tests, SAQ will be on air for shorter periods of time when we will be carrying out some tests and measurements. Your comments are welcome to info@alexander.n.se. The amateur radio station with the call SK6SAQ will be QRV during the day on the following frequencies: 3517.2 kHz CW, 7017.2 kHz CW, 14017.2 kHz CW, 3755 kHz SSB, and 7140 kHz SSB.
Amazon's Project Kuiper satellites finally made it into space aboard a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket after more than a week of weather-related delays. The rocket departed Florida's Cape Canaveral Space Force Station on Monday, October 13th at 9:58 p.m. Eastern Time. The 24 broadband internet satellites are part of a planned constellation considered to be a rival service to Starlink, which already has more than 90 missions this year to bring its satellites into space. Monday's Kuiper project launch brings that constellation's total of 153 such satellites in space. Ultimately, 3,236 are expected to be deployed at three altitudes of low Earth orbit: 590 kilometers, 610 kilometers, and 630 kilometers, to compete with Starlink's constellation of nearly the same size. Meanwhile, China has been building its own counterpart projects, which translates into English as the National Network and the Thousand Sails. Both of these planned networks are expected to contain about 13,000 satellites apiece.
The ARIS team is working towards 2 short SSTV activations for October 2025. Both of those are expected to start on a Friday and end on the following Monday. The first event is ARIS's traditional celebration of the launch of the first artificial Earth satellite in 1957. The SSTV activation started on a Friday. That was Friday, October 3rd, and ran to Monday, October 6th. The second SSTV campaign is tentatively scheduled to start on Friday, October 17th, with a short pause for a special student contact on Saturday, October 18th, and resume until completion on Monday, October the 20th. This interval roughly coincides with the International Scouting Jamboree on the air, and the SSTV image theme is expected to deal with scouting. ARIS expects to offer separate electronic award diplomas for participants who receive at least one image from a campaign and submit it to the SSTV gallery.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. Each week I try to focus on those entities that will be available in the next 7 days. There's so much data to sift through that I thought a focus on the next week might be helpful. And I got to give you a hint, if you're really into filling band slots, the next couple weeks and then first week in November is a great time to do that. And the reason is, upcoming is the CQ Worldwide Sideband Contest. And when these guys go to these new islands or they go to different places, they get on the air the week before, if they can, to test their equipment, and then they get on the week after. So sometimes you can get them easily without going through the contest. Here's what you should find QRV when you tune the bands this week. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. Several listeners and viewers have done that, and I've been able to hook them up. So if you want to give it a try, it's thedxmentor@gmail.com. During the Scouts Jamboree on the Air, or JOTA, October 18th and 19th, special call sign E2 JOTA will be active from Thailand. JOTA is an annual event in scouting that facilitates global communication among scouts through amateur radio. It is held in conjunction with Jamboree on the Internet, or JOTI, on the third full weekend of October each year. So depending on when you're listening to this, you may still have time to get Thailand in the log. Chris, VK2YUS, is QRV is YJ0CA from Port Vila, Vanuatu until October 24th. He's using sideband only. Most of his operating will take place between 2100 Zulu and 1000 Zulu. For full QSL details, visit his website on QRZ.com under the call VK2YUS. As a reminder, VE7BV Dwight is QRV from Guatemala, where he is operating holiday style as TG9BBV until October 25th. Activity is on CW, sideband, and FT8 on 7 MHz through 50 MHz. QSL director via the Bureau to VE7BV and LOTW. The Rebel DX group is QRV from NUI as Echo 6 Alpha Delta. For the first weeks, the emphasis will be on FT4 and MSHV Superfox. The entire operation will emphasize digital in CW with a, quote, little sideband mixed in as well, end quote. Dave, Golf 4 Whiskey X-Ray Juliet, gives word of his next ZC4 UK Sovereign Base Areas on Cyprus activity as Zulu Charlie 4 Romeo Hotel. He'll be operating intermittently while on holiday from Dakilia between November 3rd and 7th. Dave will be running 100 watts using dipoles and an EdFend halfway. Activity will be on CW, sideband, FT8, and FT4 on 40 meters through 6 meters. Now, I know I said the next 7 days, but I want to point this one out, the November 3rd through the 7th, because although ZC4RH isn't rare, it is not at all common. So if you have a chance to work them, do it. So you might want to put that one in your calendar. A multinational team will be on the air from Gingerbread Hill in St. Peter's on Montserrat for the CQ Worldwide DX Single Sideband Contest. They still have 1 to 3 operating positions open if you're interested. Most of the team will be there from October 22nd to 28th, so this upcoming week, with Irina and Ralph staying a few more days afterwards. During the contest, they will be operating as VP2 MPN on 80 through 10 meters in a multi-op effort. And you can QSL via VP2 MPN via Kilo Bravo 4 Yankee Papa November and eventually LOTW. The 425 DX News reminds us that 3 Baker 9 stroke M0CFW Kazoo will be QRV from Rodriguez Island October 21 to the 29th, including during the CQ Worldwide DX weekend using the call sign 3 Baker 9 kilowatt. QSL using Logbook of the World and Logbook OQRS. Club Log OQRS. Station 7 Quebec 1 Alpha will be QRV from Malawi between October 18th and the 24th. So hopefully by the time you're listening to this, operating CW and digital and the CQ Worldwide DX single sideband contest with 2 or more stations. Ops say they will have veterans and the fresh energy of a new generation with them. Quote, the future of our hobby, end quote. You can QSL 7 Quebec 1 Alpha to 7 Quebec 7 Charlie Tango, or use LOTW or QRZ logbook. Earlier today, the E51 MWA DXpedition team on the North Cook Islands announced that the local town experienced a fire at the power station, resulting in severe damage. The assessment revealed that the village will be without electricity for the next 3 to 4 months. Due to the lack of power, the team has been forced to end their operations early and will begin packing up equipment for return to the United States. The team expressed gratitude to everyone who supported them and participated in QSOs prior to the DXpedition and shared that they already were considering their next DXpedition. The DX Obsessed team is preparing for their 2025 Fox Whiskey 5 Kilo DXpedition to Wallis and Futuna Islands. The group is excited about the trip, with all members packing and finalizing logistics. Team members will depart from Arizona and Oregon meeting in Dallas, Texas, before flying to Nadi, Fiji, then onward to Wallis Island. Arrival in Wallis is scheduled for 2:25 p.m. on Saturday, October 18th. So again, about the time you're listening to this, probably. After a brief rest from travel, the team plans to set up at least one station and begin operation on FT8 and or FT4, aiming to announce their presence late Saturday evening. Despite expected rain on Saturday and Sunday, the team is prepared for weather challenges and hopes to be fully on the air by Sunday morning. Updates will be shared as the DXpedition progresses. Greg, W6IZT, reports that the PJ6Y team is en route and will rendezvous in St. Martin early this afternoon before boarding the short flight to Saba. The entire team is very excited to arrive on the island. A team dinner is planned and setup will begin shortly after sunrise tomorrow. A brief announcement will be sent out once the first stations are on the air. Thanks to everyone for your continued support. We look forward to seeing you in the pileups. And the DX Mentor recently dropped both a podcast and YouTube conversation with Greg Marco, W6IZT, who is heading up that entire DXpedition. So if you want to learn more, give that a listen or a watch. The D2 Alpha DXpedition to Angola, QRV until October 28th, consists of Portuguese and Spanish operators commemorating Angola's 50th anniversary of independence. They plan to have 6 stations on 160 through 6 meters using CW, sideband, RTTY, FT8, and QO100 satellite. 3 stations are for CW, sideband, and digital modes, 1 for single sideband and digital modes, 1 for satellite, and 1 for 6 meters. And all of this can be QSL'd via EA7 FTR. The 5 Kilo Zero Uniform Alpha DXpedition team will arrive on St. Andreas Island between October 15th and the 20th and expects to be on the air October 20 to 30. They will leave the island November 3rd. They plan to operate 160 meters through 10 meters, CW, sideband, and FT8, and will be in the CQ Worldwide DX Contest single sideband. Before and after the contest, they will conduct, quote, regular DX activity. QSL using LOTW or Clublog OQRS. Phil remains active as C21TS from Nauru until the end of November. Then he will be QRT for 2 months and back starting from February 2026. And I suggest that if you need Charlie 2 for your DX Marathon for 2025, you better get him now until the end of November because there will be no chance in December. Quote, I'll probably be back for a few months from February 2026 with minimal gear, probably just an FT891. Hard finish will be June 2026 and no later. So if you need him in 2026, you better get him. QSL via M0OXO, OQRS, or LOTW. Bernard, DL2GAC, is once again QRV as H44MS from the Solomon Islands until November 25th, with a small break again between January 25th and April 10th of 2026. Operation from 80 to 6 meters using sideband and FT8. And you can QSL this H44MS via DL2GAC. Maurizio, IK2GZU, is QRV again as 5 Hotel 3 Mike Bravo from Tanzania until November 20th. He returns as a volunteer in the Akelu Hospital in the South Highlands. He will be operating in his spare time on HF using CW, sideband, and digital modes. And you can QSL 5 Hotel 3 Mike Bravo via IK2GZU. Luke, F5RAV, is QRV from the Gambia as Charlie 5 Radio until October 31st. Following on from previous visits where the money was raised to build a new classroom for infants, the plan this time is to build 2 more classrooms and start a radio club to introduce YOTA. Boy, Luke, that is just a great effort, and congratulations and good luck to you. Contest updates. I know that the ARL contest sheet is read elsewhere in this podcast, and the contests that I mention are sometimes redundant. However, there are a few contests that I have found to be especially useful for DXers who are trying to fill band slots or work all-time new ones. The contest that you should be preparing for is the CQ Worldwide Single Sideband Contest, which is October 26th and 27th. The side benefit to both this contest and the CQ Worldwide CW contest at the end of November is the DX that you can work before and after the contest. As I mentioned, they're building their stations up and testing it, and then they're tearing it down a few days after the contest. After the contest, as I mentioned, they often hang around for a few days, enjoying the location, arranging their flight plans, and spending more casual time on the air. it is certainly a great time to fill band slots and to pick up an all-time new one. So keep your eyes and ears open. And what I really like about the Secure Worldwide test is, sometimes you hear a call sign and you're not sure of the prefix or you're not sure where that person is really from. But when they give the exchange and it's, call sign and then a zone, you instantly know zone 23, zone 26, zone 16. You should know, or you will be familiar with what part of the world that zone is. And it's very likely there's a country in that zone that you need. So I like working DX in this contest because it's very quick to identify who's out there and what you need. Until next week, this is Bill, AJB, saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pileups. Have a great DX week.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. The other day I went on my first POTA, or Parks on the Air adventure. This time I was on my own. If you recall, my power company announced yet another planned network outage, and I felt that I could use this time without electricity to my benefit, for a change. As is traditional, I did all the prior planning to prevent pretty poor performance. I made a list, checked that all the items on the list were in my kit, packed the kit days before, put it all ready to go in the hallway the night before, packed the car on the day, and set out on my adventure. I will confess that I was slightly more sweaty than anticipated when I set off because the umbrella in the boot of my car has a nasty and recurring habit of getting in the way. Specifically, it stops things from getting pushed right to the full depth of the boot. Mind you, it wasn't until I started getting agitated that I realized that it wasn't the umbrella's fault entirely this time, since, as it turns out, the folding chair that I was attempting to jam in place doesn't actually fit long ways into the boot. Anywho, I set off and visited the local petrol station. I was not prepared for a customer to spend 15 minutes dribbling the last bit of diesel into their pretend sports utility vehicle, but he looked like he was up for a fight, so I smiled sweetly and waited for him to pay and move his box on wheels. After paying for my own fuel and driving off, the pressure in my bladder had gotten beyond the cross your legs and hope for the best stages, and I swiftly made my way to the nearest shopping complex, where a local pharmacist helpfully told me that there were no toilets in the building and that the local hotel or fast food joint were the place to relieve the pressure. One problem: they were both closed. At this point I was in pain and discovered that I couldn't read the screen on my mobile phone in the lovely sunlight because it was set to battery saving mode, since my charger was at home where the power was out. After disabling the battery saving mode, I opened the local public toilet map shortcut on my phone and discovered that fortunately the shortcut still worked, opening up my default browser, which suddenly didn't want to display a map. Copied the URL to another browser, still in pain, finally a map. Click on the nearest icon and it navigates me there from Darwin, or over 4,000 kilometers from where I actually am. Luckily, it has the GPS location, which I copy and then paste into my mapping app, and I can finally navigate to the nearest toilet. Several comment-worthy navigation moves later, I drive into the car park, lock the car, painfully shuffle to the building, do my business in the very clean facilities, and then decide that I should just stop, sit, and take a breath. So I get in the car and discover that my partner was right when they heaped scorn on our newly acquired thermos cup. It really does hurt your nose when you try to drink from it, and the sharp edges in your mouth do nothing to make the experience joyful. Meanwhile, there's some trucks moving around in the car park, and a guy walks up to the car to ask me if I can move because they want to move a third, or was it fourth truck into the space. I swallow my sip of restorative coffee, wipe the now wet bridge of my nose, and move the car, only to be blocked from leaving the exit thanks to the slowest reversing truck I've ever encountered, one who then proceeds to sit at the next intersection for 5 minutes without indicating where it was going. Are we having fun yet? I finally made my way to the main road, where I attempted to calm my nerves with the help of a Morse code edition of my podcast. It's been the only exposure I've had to Morse for way too long. This accompanies me to my first destination, breakfast. I'm going to skip past the drivers in the centre lane driving at 10 kilometres per hour below the posted speed limit, or the ones who think that jumping out of a side street in front of you is normal and safe driving practice. At every traffic light I celebrate the pause with a sip from my coffee and a furtive wipe of my nose, which is being assaulted by the lid of the cup. I arrive at my breakfast destination and fear the worst. Their car park is almost empty. I've never seen it this quiet, and I didn't check to confirm that they were open, or not. I look at my map application and remember to turn my phone back to battery saving mode. According to the internet, my cafe is open, so I cross my fingers and get out of the car. To my delight, they are absolutely open, make me a lovely breakfast and provide the needful for lunch too. I have a big day planned after all. After enjoying breakfast and hot chocolate with 2 marshmallows, I get back in the car and navigate to my planned set-up location. As I drive into the park, I notice something that I hadn't the last time I was here. I'm descending, as in, the deeper into the park I go, the more I go downhill. That in and of itself isn't a cause for concern were it not for the fact that the local repeaters are on the hilltops that overlook the city, and I'm several hills inland and travelling into a valley. I'm keeping my eyes open for side roads and alternatives, but gamely proceed to the formal entrance of the park, where I pay my $17 to have a car with a maximum of 12 passengers enter the national park. I drive to the location I have planned and discover that there's a car park quite close to the gazebo I've earmarked, so I park there. I figure that before I get all set up in the gazebo for a day of radio, I should first check what I can learn from where I'm parked, especially since I'll need to pull the gear out of the car either way. Before I get out of the car, I attempt to mark my actual location on the map, only to discover that there's no mobile phone coverage. So much for using Echolink as a fallback. I pull out the folding table, which neatly fits next to the car, dig out the coax from the boot and lead it out the passenger door. The other end is connected to the boot lip mount that has been there for years. In case of failure, I did bring a magnetic base, but I'm optimistic. I removed the HF and VHF multiband antennas from their storage spot taped to the driver's side rear passenger roof grab handle and pull out the previously errant folding chair. All is going well. I pull out the spare coax and my anxiety spikes a little. This is what I think might be what causes me to come unstuck. It's a 10-metre or so length of coax. It's untested, terminated with BNC, and I'm concerned that I didn't bring enough adapters beyond the BNC to PL259 and the SO239 barrel I packed hastily the night before. I push away my fear since I'm not needing this right now, and I continue to unpack the radio, noticing that to my immense relief the knobs are still attached. Set it all up, pull the power cable from the 12-volt, 80-amp-hour AGM deep cycle battery, quote, ideal for 4-wheel drive, caravan and camping trailers, end quote, which I bought 4 years ago to power my dash cams and the radio. It's automatically charged by a 360-watt DC to DC converter that's connected to the alternator in the car, because I don't want my dash cams, or radio for that matter, to stop me from starting the car. Ask me how I know. The power leads are long enough to make it out of the boot, and I connect the inline voltmeter to the battery, 12.6 volt, the same as what I saw when I checked it a week earlier. I mount the VHF multiband antenna connected to the radio after pulling out the N-type to PL259 adapter, which is on the list and part of the standard kit. I take a breath and turn on my radio, tune to the local repeater frequency and hit the PTT. The radio is set to 5 watts and I'm hoping to hear the repeater tone. Nothing. I check all the repeaters in my radio, about 7 of them. None of them do anything. Then I hear a click. I've been on air for all of 3 minutes. I notice the radio is turned off. I've seen this before. Sometimes stray RF gets into something and causes the radio to stop. I turn it back on and notice the voltage on the display of the radio. 9.65 volts. That is not good. I check the inline voltmeter. It doesn't even display anything. I turn off the radio to save what little power I have. I take a moment to consider and attach the HF antenna, hoping that I can run the radio for a few seconds to check the local 10-meter repeater. All is good to go. Turn on the radio and it won't even turn on, just flickering on and off. I feel like I want to cry, but there doesn't seem to be any point. I pack everything back up. The water, my hat, the radio, the coax, the antennas, the table, the chair, put it all back in where it came from, even the sandwich I was going to have for lunch. After slowly reversing out of the car bay, looking carefully at the ground to make sure I didn't leave anything behind, I make my way out of the park. I've been there for a grand total of 29 minutes. I briefly entertained the idea of going to the nearest electronics store and spending $50 on a small battery. But I don't actually have a working charger, and spending several $100s on a charger and battery is not really in my budget at the moment. Whilst I was driving home, I got a notification that the power was out at my QTH. I got home 52 minutes after the power went out. It stayed off for the next 6 hours. So much for being productive. My friend Charles, November Kilo 8 Oscar, tells me that his first few activations were a bust. He's a Sapphire POTAR activator with 609 activations across 372 parks, so there's hope for me yet. In looking back at this adventure, I was planning for failure. I'd thought through all the different permutations of what might happen. Not for one moment did I consider that my battery might be a single point of failure. That said, there were hints that not all was well. The 12.6 volts was one hint. The fact that my dash cams have been acting up was another. I had been on the hunt for a battery monitor for the past 2 years to discover precisely what was going on, but I haven't found one that doesn't require a specific app that needs to know where you are or what's in your diary, so I put it out of my mind. As it happens, that was where I made my rookie mistake. Mind you, part of me knows that I don't have another battery anyway, so it really didn't matter if the battery was faulty or not. Either way, I wasn't going to connect my radio to my car battery. I learned that lesson well over a decade ago. I'm back to the drawing board. It's unlikely we'll use that location to activate for the 750th edition of F-Troop, but when I get my power situation sorted out, it's still a lovely place to get on air and make some noise. I'm Ono. Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
The BBC now expects to close its flagship national radio service, Radio 4, on longwave at some point during 2026. This according to a BBC contact that has told the campaign to keep longwave. The news comes in a month that marks 91 years of broadcasting on longwave from the main Deutwitch transmitter, and during the centenary year of one of the most iconic longwave programs, the Shipping Forecast. Meanwhile, the campaign to stop this shutdown altogether continues. Any longwave shutdown during 2026 would leave the shipping forecast inaudible to many mariners, as FM and Coast Guard signals cannot travel further than a few miles offshore. It would also deprive thousands of longwave listeners across the country from a much-loved source of news, entertainment, and education in the form of Radio 4, which isn't available in all areas on FM or DAB. Contrary to rumors circulated on some parts of the internet, however, an exact shutdown date for longwave has not yet been decided, as the BBC continues to carry out an impact assessment on the closure of the service. The BBC has stated its intention to inform listeners of the actual date at least 2 months before the signal is shut off, and this could happen as early as January 2026 or not till December. The campaign to keep longwave continues to push for this date to be put back further and indeed indefinitely postponed. In a report called Still Speaking to the Nations, published earlier this year, it set out several important reasons for keeping the longwave broadcast. Those reasons include the low energy costs of broadcasting from a single transmitter to the whole nation, the importance of a single nationwide reliable signal in the event of war or cyber attack that could render the internet inaccessible, the need for longwave broadcasts of shipping forecasts at sea, provision of Radio 4 in parts of the country that are poorly served by FM, DAB, and the internet. The heritage value of continuing a service that's run for nearly a century, let alone the countless vintage receivers capable of tuning in, and no hard evidence that long-wave listenership is declining and the need to attract new listeners to radio for the BBC's own survival. Added to this, we can now conclude that the importance of Radio 4 longwave to some listeners in war-torn Ukraine, who can find therein a trustworthy source of news that cannot be blocked by hostile powers. The BBC has yet to provide a detailed response to the report or to petition to keep the longwave containing over 5,000 signatures, which was delivered in person to the Broadcasting House back on June 7, 2025. In a time of uncertainty, division, and political turmoil, the importance of Radio 4 longwave has never been greater.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. October 8th marked the 10th anniversary of the launch of AMSAT's first Fox 1 satellite, or AO-85. It was operational for 4 years before battery failure. China, CAS-11, was listed as being on the Gravity 1 rocket launch per the IARU filing. However, CAS-11 was not on board the launch vehicle. We need to await an update on the launch of this satellite. There are a bunch of awards for satellite operators to earn from AMSAT, as well as the ARRL. The ARRL VUCC award is for working 100 different grids over satellite, with endorsements for more grids. AMSAT offers the reverse VUCC award on satellite. This is for those that do a lot of traveling from many different grids. Thus far, earning the top spot is James, ND9M, with 494 reverse grids. Close behind him is Randy, WI7P, with 475 reverse grids. James has worked many of his grids on a ship, whereas Randy earned most of his driving throughout the United States. As we go to press, the AMSAT Symposium is taking place in Phoenix. I will have more news about this next week. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for this week's space weather and terrestrial propagation forecast. Solar activity reached moderate levels due to M-class flare activity. Region 4246 underwent significant evolution, growing in overall size while gaining multiple new spots. Subsequently, AR 4246 was the main provider of activity, which included M1.2 flares on October 13. Several coronal mass ejections with potential Earth-directed components are in the mix at this time. Additional modeling efforts are underway to perhaps confirm those suspicions. The largest flare was a long-duration M4.82 on October 15. Several coronal mass ejections with potential Earth-directed components are in the mix at this time. Other notable activity included a prominence eruption off the east-northeast limb, first visible in LASCO C2 imagery on October 14. Given the location of the event, initial analysis suggests this ejecta to be well into foul ball territory and not Earth-directed. Additional modeling efforts are underway to perhaps confirm this suspicion. Slight decay was observed in the intermediate portion of region 4248 as it grew in length. Region 4247 was in decay as well. The remaining regions were unremarkable in comparison. No new regions were assigned numbers this period. Minor to moderate radio blackouts are likely for the next 3 days, with a slight chance for an isolated strong event, due to the current and potential flare activity of regions 4246 and 4248. Solar wind parameters continued to reflect the influence of a negative polarity coronal hole high-speed stream. Solar wind speeds finally dipped below 600 km per second and phi was predominantly in the negative solar sector. Solar wind parameters are expected to continue at enhanced levels, although gradually waning, and continuing through October 17, due to coronal mass ejection arrivals from October 11 through the 13th originating from AR 4246. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read a quick guide to HF propagation using solar indices, and check out the propagation page of Karl Lewetzelschwab, K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the vocap online for ham radio website.
Just ahead in radio sport this week, October 18th through the 19th, a lot of contests here. The 1010 International Fall Contest, CW, the New York QSO Party, CW Phone and Digital, the Worked All Germany Contest, CW and Phone, and the Stu Perry Top Band Challenge, that is CW. And remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events in your area. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions, October 23rd through the 26th. It's the HamCom Colorado 2025, hosting the ARRL Rocky Mountain Division Convention. That's in Grand Junction, Colorado. And on November 1st, the Stone Mountain Hamfest, hosting the ARRL Georgia State Convention. That's in Lawrenceville, Georgia. And remember to search the ARRL Hamfest calendar and convention database to find more events in your area. The ARRL School Club Roundup is now on Contest Online Scoreboard. The operating event is being held October 20th through the 24th. The 5-day event runs Monday through Friday from 1300 UTC Monday through 2359 UTC on Friday. A station may operate no more than 6 hours in a 24-hour period and a maximum of 24 hours of the 107-hour event. For more information on the event, visit www.arrl.org/school-club-roundup.
A U.S. federal judge has ordered the Trump administration to halt layoffs at Voice of America, freezing the planned elimination of 532 full-time staff positions at the U.S. Agency for Global Media. The cuts would have represented most of the agency's remaining employees. In his written order, Lamberth said he no longer harbors any doubt that the defendants lack a plan to comply with the preliminary injunction. He accused officials of running out the clock on the fiscal year while remaining in violation of even the most meager reading of U.S. Agency for Global Media and Voice of America's statutory obligations. The White House criticized the decision in a statement to Reuters, calling Royce an activist judge who was attempting to subvert the will of the American people. Under the direction of Trump advisor Kari Lake, approximately 1,400 U.S. Agency for Global Media employees have been terminated or placed on indefinite leave since March. The cuts included nearly 600 contract employees and most permanent staff, bringing VOA's 49 language services down to 4 languages, while canceling contracts with the Associated Press, Reuters, and other news services.
Welcome to the 28th segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio. Hams, Organizations, Events, Inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our thanks to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website in the production of these segments. Now sit back and relax and enjoy the next chapter of Ham Radio History. Radio telephone. As vacuum tubes were making CW practical, they were also making voice transmissions possible. Experimental broadcasts using radio telephone, or just phone to hams, began as experiments by amateurs and some of the wireless telegraph companies, including Marconi and DeForest. In these early years of radio, just having a receiver to listen to the limited number of phone broadcasts was sufficient to be regarded as a radio amateur. The Marconi wireless telephone was demonstrated publicly for the first time on 12 June 1916. Aboard a ship making its way out of Long Island Sound en route to Boston, an audience heard conversation and music via a 2-hour broadcast from Marconi's station in Aldine, New Jersey. David Sarnoff, then Marconi's communications manager, demonstrated the new technology to members of the New York Technology Club who were on their way to attend dedication ceremonies for new buildings at MIT. Among the distinguished group were Orville Wright and Alexander Graham Bell. That same year, thousands of amateurs listened to the DeForest Company's radio-telephone test broadcast of opera music from a phonograph in their lab at Highbridge in New York City. The company planned to continue the tests with a news format scheduled for every weekday at 8 p.m. on 800 meters. With so many hams in the audience, their request for reception reports was answered quickly as the mail poured in just before the war closing took effect. After the war, some of the first regular broadcasts came from Frank Conrad's station, 8XK in Pittsburgh, playing music. Westinghouse, his employer, began manufacturing simple receivers so that people who were not amateurs could also listen, establishing a new and different category of radio users. Several thousand Westinghouse receivers were sold in the Pittsburgh area in 1920, perhaps the first such sale specifically aimed at the general public rather than hams. Anticipating a business opportunity broader than just Pittsburgh, the company proceeded to erect broadcasting transmitters in several other cities. Conrad Station 8XK later became KDKA. This was the beginning of the radio broadcasting boom, which would put wireless technology into almost every home and revolutionize both commercial and amateur radio. One of the first in-depth technical treatises to cover radiotelephone for radio amateurs was delivered by engineer Walter S. Lemon at an RCA meeting in the spring of 1920 and published in QST. Describing basic amplitude modulation, AM, Lemon emphasized the necessity of using only undamped waves, since any form of damped oscillation would not be capable of faithfully reproducing the modulating audio. With spark, for example, any audio that occurred between sparks would be lost. This fact had not kept people from trying. One early method of modulation simply involved inserting a microphone in the antenna or ground lead. However, the limited current carrying capability and resultant heating of the microphone makes this scheme very wasteful of energy, and it has long since been abandoned, wrote Lemon, without mentioning the likely uncomfortable effects on the operator. With vacuum tube sets, you instead could modulate the grid or plate current by various means, basically the same ways practiced today. The plate or Heising system was preferred, in which a modulator tube's plate circuit was placed in parallel with the oscillator's tube plate circuit, both supplied with DC via a choke bypassed for RF by a capacitor. When the modulator tube conducted, it decreased the current in the oscillator tube, thus modulating the signal. Raymond A. Heising, for whom the method was named, was an engineer at the research laboratories of AT&T and Western Electric. He presented the idea himself to an amateur radio audience in another RCA to QST relay, a seminar at Columbia University in February 1921, followed by a two-part QST article. It was yet another example of a radio pioneer, well published in professional journals, adapting his work to be understood and used by amateurs and describing it in a seminal paper. Heising explained the theory of amplitude modulation, but called it simply radiotelephony. His comprehensive treatment first warned against applying modulation techniques used in telegraphy, pointing out the fundamental distinctions that are obvious today. For example, in telegraphy, any old noise applied to the transmitted signal would suffice to make it audible in the receiver, whereas in telephony, the object was to have the receiver exactly replicate only the applied noise. He actually called it noise, meant in a generic way to mean useful sound, not a thing to be avoided. He proceeded to explain the basic mathematics, the origin of sidebands, which he called side frequencies, and the problem of overmodulation, describing its sound as tinny. Part 2 presented all the information amateurs needed to build an up-to-date radio telephone transmitter, including circuit designs and advice on which circuits and component values to choose for various kinds of vacuum tubes. In the summer of 1921, it was all there, the complete basic blueprint for sending sounds over radio. Many others would build upon this foundation for decades to come. Heising's article was just in time for, or perhaps one of the causes of, the coming explosion in radiotelephony. Included in this material are quotes from the following. The Marconi Wireless Telephone, QST, August 1916, page 234. A Concert by Wireless, QST, January 1917, page 26. DeForest Wireless Telephone, QST, 1917, page 72. Clinton B. DeSoto, 200 meters and down, the American Radio Relay League, Incorporated, 1936, page 70. W. S. Lemon, Recent Development of Radio Telephones, QST, June 1920, page 7. R. A. Heising, Modulation in Radiotelephony, Part 1 and Part 2, QST, July 1921, page 7, and August 1921, page 9. with our thanks to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for his permission for us to use his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions. In the preparation of this segment, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
TuneIn.com, a popular radio and podcast streaming app, is teaming up with the USA's Federal Emergency Management Agency's integrated public alert and warning system to deliver emergency alerts through its Android Auto TuneIn app. The streaming audio platform heralded the announcement as an important step forward as the industry shifts toward digital-first audio experiences. TuneIn's internet-based service delivers reliable audio quality and broader coverage than traditional radio, especially in areas where terrestrial signals may be limited, a release said. The feature offers iPause alerts from the local, state, tribal, and federal agency level to TuneIn users in affected areas. It is available to auto manufacturers that integrate TuneIn as part of their vehicle infotainment systems through Android Auto. A TuneIn spokesperson said the company has no specifics for motorists who use Apple CarPlay for infotainment or phone projection. The spokesperson added that the company is exploring all options.
At the International Astronomical Congress taking place in Sydney last week, representatives from the United States and Australia gathered to sign a framework agreement that strengthens collaboration in aeronautics and space exploration between the two nations. Acting NASA Administrator Sean Duffy and Australian Space Agency head Enrico Palermo signed the agreement Tuesday on behalf of their countries, respectively. Australia is an important and long-time space partner from Apollo to Artemis, and this agreement depends on that partnership, said Duffy. International agreements like this work to leverage our resources and increase our capabilities and scientific returns for all, proving critical to NASA's plans from low Earth orbit to the Moon, Mars, and beyond. Australian Minister for Industry and Innovation and Minister for Science Tim Ayres said the signing builds on more than a half-century of collaboration between the two nations. Strengthening Australia's partnership with the U.S. and NASA creates new opportunities for Australian ideas and technologies, improving Australia's industrial capability, boosting productivity, and building economic resilience, Ayres said. Known as the Framework Agreement between the government of the United States of America and the government of Australia on cooperation in aeronautics and the exploration and use of aerospace and outer space for peaceful purposes, it recognizes cooperation that mutually is beneficial for the U.S. and Australia and establishes the legal framework under which the countries will work together. Potential areas for cooperation include space exploration, space science, earth science, including geodesy, space medicine, and life sciences, aeronautics research, and technology. NASA has collaborated with Australia on civil space activities since 1960, when the two countries signed their first cooperative space agreement. The Canberra Deep Space Communication Complex played a vital role in supporting NASA's Apollo program, most notably during the Apollo 13 mission. Well, today, the complex is one of 3 global stations in NASA's Deep Space Network, supporting both robotic and human spaceflight missions. One of the original signatories to the Artemis Accords, Australia joined the United States under President Donald Trump and 6 other nations in October 2020 in supporting a basic set of principles for the safe and responsible use of space. Global space leaders from many of the 56 signatory countries met in Sydney this week to further their implementation. As part of an existing partnership with the Australian Space Agency, Australia is developing a semi-autonomous lunar rover which will carry a NASA analysis instrument, which is intended to demonstrate technology for scientific and exploration purposes. The rover is scheduled to launch by the end of the decade through NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services Initiative. NASA's international partnerships reflect the agency's commitment to peaceful, collaborative space exploration, building on a legacy of cooperation from the Space Shuttle to the International Space Station and now Artemis Artemis. International partnerships support NASA's plans for lunar exploration under the Artemis campaign and future human exploration of Mars.
Edward F. Ed Hare, Jr., W1RFI, who spent decades as an employee of the ARRL laboratory, has become a silent key. He died on October 10th of 2025 at the age of 75. Hare was first licensed as a teenager as WN1CYF, later WA1CYF and KA1CV, and was an active ham throughout his life. He was an avid QRP operator, earning his Worked All State certificate with 250 milliwatts on CW. In his professional life, he was an accomplished product test engineer and a leading expert on radio frequency interference. After an industry career in product testing, he came to work for the ARRL in 1986. During his tenure, Hare led a technical expert aspects of the many important advocacy efforts taken on by ARRL's lab, including the successful fight against the broadband over power lines. Hare's extensive technical studies and solid factual data effectively supported ARRL's Court of Appeals submissions against the FCC, thus contributing substantially to ARRL's victory and causing the FCC's flawed BPL rules to be remanded. Hare developed a waiver process in cooperation with the United States military to allow amateur radio access to the 70-centimeter band near several high-power radar sites. He also started the ARRL RFI program, which helps amateurs work through the FCC to resolve interference problems. He was also instrumental in ARRL's 2023 defense against the high-speed stock traders petition that would risk significant interference to the amateur HF bands. Hare had the seat for the amateur radio on many industry committees, including several of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, and on the American National Standards Committee C63, which develops standards for testing and measuring electromagnetic compatibility. Many radio clubs recall Hare's popular Stump the Speaker feature that he held after giving presentations. Hare would allow the audience to try and stump him with radio questions and trivia, and they were rarely successful. He retired from the ARRL as laboratory manager in 2023, but continued to serve in the lab as a volunteer until the time of his death. He frequently mentored members of the ARRL staff on improving their operating skills and encouraged them to grow as radio amateurs. He was especially fond of creating new CW operators. Hare was a member of the ARRL Diamond Club and the A1 Operators Club. The ARRL Board of Directors bestowed the ARRL Technical Merit Award on Hare in 2008 for his work on APL, an honor that, before Hare, was last awarded in 1976.
It is time for this week's AMSAT satellite shorts from all over, and once again this week they are really short. We begin with October 8th, 2025, which was the 10th anniversary of the launch of AMSAT's first Fox 1 satellite, AO85. Although it suffered from a slightly deaf receiver, AO85 provided amateur service for 4 years before succumbing to battery failure, supporting thousands of QSOs. Additionally, the satellite returned 6,411,349 frames of telemetry over its lifetime, including experimental data for Vanderbilt University. Next, ARIS's Slow Scan TV Series 29, highlighting World Space Week, concluded last week with over 3,200 people submitting more than 8,000 image decodes so far. To receive a digital certificate, submit your decodes by 23:59 UTC on Sunday, October 12th online to aris-usa.org. And our final short looks at a rumor that circulated recently saying that CAMSAT's CAS-11 satellite would launch this week on the Gravity 1 rocket from a sea launch platform off the coast of Haiyang. Although the launch was successful and the orbital parameters and launch information match the IARU filing for CAS-11, it appears that the satellite was not on board.
2 Faraday cages have been put in place at the Square Kilometre Array site in Western Australia to protect the giant radio telescope from interference caused by RF leaks coming from inside the data center. The data center and the array are being built in Murchison, a remote location that provides a needed environment of radio quietness. Despite the radio silence at the location, the data center's computers, which connect to the city of Perth, generate stray RF, spurring the need for Faraday cages to prevent the electromagnetic energy from escaping. The International Massive Array, which will have 131,072 antennas, is still a work in progress since it was started in 2022. The site in Australia is home to the array's low-frequency antennas. South Africa is housing the mid-frequency antennas. The observatory and headquarters are at the Jodrell Bank Observatory in northwest England. Although the array will still be a work in progress through to 2029, Philip Diamond, director of the Square Kilometre Array Observatory, recently told the Register website that tests may be run on the facility as early as 2027. He told the Register, "By then we will have the largest physical low-frequency telescope on the planet."
Federal Communications Commission Chairman Brendan Carr vowed October 6 to accelerate satellite regulatory reforms, declaring October as Space Month at the U.S. regulator to overhaul licensing and spectrum rules amid mounting competition from China. Speaking at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for Apex's new satellite manufacturing facility in El Segundo, California, Carr outlined two main proposals that the FCC is preparing to vote on. The first would replace our bespoke licensing process with a licensing assembly line, which Carr said would presume straightforward satellite and Earth station applications are in the public interest and eligible for expedited approval. The second proposal would revise siting rules for Earth stations in the upper microwave bands, known as UMFUS, to enable more intensive use of spectrum and simplify approvals for operators. We'll replace a default at no at the agency with a default to yes framework, Carr said. Since January, Carr said streamlining efforts have already helped the FCC process half of the Earth station applications that had been pending before the regulator. He also pointed to an ongoing rulemaking that could free up more than 20,000 megahertz of spectrum for satellite broadband and a review of spectrum sharing rules between geostationary and non-geostationary systems. The latest proposals follow an August 13th executive order signed by President Trump directing federal agencies to remove regulatory barriers for the commercial space industry, including reforms to launch licensing, mission authorization, and environmental reviews. Carr said the FCC's actions are aligned with the administration's broader Build America agenda, which seeks to strengthen U.S. leadership in what he described as a space race 2.0. His speech underscored the geopolitical urgency behind the reforms as launches get underway in China for tens of thousands of broadband satellites that would rival U.S.-based Starlink. Our main competitor in this space race 2.0 is the government of China, he said. They have their eyes set on dominating in low Earth orbit and, frankly, up and down every orbit. The FCC did not provide more details about the incoming proposals or how they might be affected by the outgoing U.S. government shutdown.
A free weekly live amateur radio general class licensing course on the Zoom platform will begin on Thursday, October 30th, and will run through Thursday, January 8th. This will be a total of 9 sessions with no class being held on Thanksgiving or Christmas. The 3-hour sessions will start at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. These are the classes that we have been holding for years, sponsored by the Amateur Radio Club of the National Electronics Museum. Participants in the course should have or be studying for their amateur radio license. Those wishing to sign up should email roland.anders@comcast.net.
Coming up this week on Ham Shack TV, there's an episode you won't want to miss. On Wednesday, October 23rd at 8 p.m. Eastern, join host Ham Shack TV live on YouTube for a special conversation with Bob Ronk, a seasoned operator and member of the Bouvet Island DXpedition team. We'll be diving into one of the most talked about adventures in the world of amateur radio, the Bouvet Island DXpedition. Often called the most isolated island in the world, Bouvet sits deep in the South Atlantic Ocean, and making contact from there is a true badge of honor for any DXer. Bob will share a behind-the-scenes look at what it takes to plan, execute, and operate from such a remote and unforgiving location, from battling rough seas to keeping equipment running in extreme conditions. You'll hear about the logistics, the gear, and the teamwork that make these reactivations possible. Whether you're an experienced DX chaser or just curious about what drives hams to the ends of the earth in pursuit of that elusive contact, this is an episode you won't want to miss. So, mark your calendars and tune in to Ham Shack TV on YouTube, October 23rd at 8 p.m. Eastern, and join the live chat to ask your own questions during the show. That's Ham Shack TV, where the adventure of amateur radio comes to life.
After announcing on October 6th that it would vote on a notion of proposed rulemaking on ATC 3.0 at its October meeting, the Federal Communications Commission released a draft of the measure that provides more details on how it plans to consider the matter and which questions it might explore. The draft, which could change before the FCC is scheduled to vote on October 28, raised more questions than answers about how the agency might act on key issues related to next-gen TV, but does provide some hints on how FCC Chairman Brendan Carr is thinking about the subject. The draft notes that the FCC has tentatively concluded that TV stations should be allowed to choose when to stop broadcasting via the ATSC 1.0 standard and begin broadcasting exclusively in 3.0. It also tentatively concluded that TV stations should be allowed to broadcast in both 1.0 and 3.0, as many are doing now, but with fewer restrictions and requirements than the 1.0 version. This would free up more spectrum for advanced ATC 3.0 services. The draft would take a more neutral approach to other key issues, raising a series of questions about key topics, like the creation of new rules mandating ATC 3.0 tuners in all new TVs. Consumer electronics firms have consistently opposed a tuner mandate, arguing that it would increase the cost of TV sets and is generally unnecessary because most consumers access video content over streaming and pay TV services rather than over-the-air antennas. Next-gen TV is coming, and it will transform local broadcasting into a vibrant, interactive service that not only competes with big tech streaming platforms, but also delivers enhanced emergency alerting, hyper-local weather warnings, and life-saving public safety information.
Operational plans are underway to activate around the Maldives, but don't expect to log any contacts from islands on the air locations. The grid squares for 8Q7OS are being activated as wet squares during an ocean diving safari led by Sergey R900F with Maria UB9OGC and Dmitry UB9OFY. Listen for call signs 8Q7OS/MM, 8Q7DD/MM, and 8Q7MD/MM from October 26th through November 2nd. They'll be on the air using SSB on 20, 17, 15, and 10 meters. During this not uncommon way to combine boating adventure with amateur radio, the hams won't just be fishing for QSOs, but diving for recreation from a chartered yacht. So if the Maldives archipelago is on your list of all-time new ones, Sergey writes on his page on QRZ.com that you're bound to be disappointed. He wrote, "I am not on air from any islands."
The Roadshow Amateur Radio Club, WA4TRS, will be live or unalive from the Bald Mountain Baptist Church Cemetery in Bat Cave, North Carolina, on October 31st from 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time until midnight. This is a special chance to work a real live graveyard on Halloween night. All amateur radio operators are invited to come haunt the airwaves. Modes and bands will be CW, phone, and digital on 40, 20, 15, 10, and 6 meters, plus 2-meter phone. Exact frequencies will be announced during the event via DX Watch and DX Summit. CW spots can be found on the Reverse Beacon Network. For more information on the Roadshow Amateur Radio Club, please visit the club's Facebook group. The Roadshow Amateur Radio Club is an ARRL-affiliated club.
October 11th was a busy day on the Hennepin Technical College campus in Brooklyn Park, where an attendance of more than 250 set a new record for the North Star Radio Convention, now in its third year, putting the convention more prominently on the state ham radio map. Program Manager Dale Henninger, W0DHZ, said in a release that the convention had successfully revived the tradition of a statewide amateur radio convention in Minnesota, something the community had been without for more than 2 decades. This was also the 2025 ARRL Minnesota State Convention, organized with the support of 11 local ham clubs whose members provided volunteers and financial sponsorship through the Minnesota Amateur Radio Consortium. The agenda included a transmitter hunt, a QRP QSO party, a Get on the Air station, and 25 different educational sessions covering a wide range of topics of interest to amateurs. Dale said that the convention is one way in which the groups work together to strengthen Minnesota's amateur radio community and inspire the next generation of operators.
Organizers from the Amateur Radio Club of Khulna are calling the Sunderbans DXpedition a milestone event that will combine the talents of newly licensed ham radio operators from Bangladesh under the coordination of Shuvo S21CMD. Operating from what is considered the world's largest mangrove forest, the youthful team of many as 20 will be putting the call sign S21SDX on the air from November 13 through the 15th. Shuvo said in a press release that Bangladesh's few young amateur radio operators are not only connecting voices across the continent, but also carrying the spirit of nature in every transmission, whether calling CQ or sharing stories over HF. They'll be operating on most of the HF bands using sideband and FT8. The activation in the West Forest Division of the Khulna Range will be a Parks on the Air activation, much as a DXpedition. The Sudaran Bands is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a sanctuary for the Bengal tiger. Shuvo said, "Our tiger is to test and prove the potential of young amateur radio operators of Bangladesh, and to spotlight the beauty, biodiversity, and cultural richness of the Sundarbans to the world through the universal language of radio."
Amateur Radio on the International Space Station, or ARISS, is pleased to announce the U.S. schools and host organizations newly selected for 2026 ARISS contacts. A total of 4 of the submitted proposals during the recent proposal window have been accepted to move forward in the process of planning to host a scheduled amateur radio contact with the crew on the ISS. The ARISS program anticipates that NASA will be able to provide scheduling opportunities for the 4 U.S. host organizations during the January 2026 through June 2026 time period. They are now at work starting to implement their 4 to 6 month education plan, which was outlined in their proposal. These STEM-based educational activities help prepare students for their contact, as well as create an ongoing exploration and interest in aerospace and amateur radio topics. They are also completing an acceptable equipment plan that demonstrates their ability to execute the ham radio contact. Once their equipment plan is approved by ARISS, the final selected schools and organizations will be scheduled as their availability and flexibility match up with the scheduling opportunities offered by NASA. The schools and host organizations are ASU STEM Preparatory Academy in Mesa, Arizona, Con Magnet Elementary School in Raleigh, North Carolina, the Center for Creativity, Innovation, and Discovery in Providence, Utah, and the Ecotarium in Worcester, Massachusetts. The primary goal of the ARISS program is to engage young people in science, technology, engineering, arts, and math activities, and raise awareness of space communications, radio communications, space exploration, and related areas of study and career possibilities.
A military spacecraft launched 56 years ago was moved from its orbit, and nobody is quite sure who did it or why. In 1969, the United Kingdom launched Skynet 1A, a military communication satellite placed in orbit above the east coast of Africa in order to relay information to British armed forces. It stopped working due to hardware issues around 18 months after it started operating, and the spacecraft was left to the laws of physics to orbit the Earth. It is now the oldest UK spacecraft still in space. It's a good idea to check on defunct satellites to make sure the space debris is not on course to collide with any working satellites or populated areas of the Earth below. In the 1970s, when the satellite was closely tracked, it was in a geostationary arc at a longitude of around 40 degrees east, where it remained when it was decommissioned. Such orbits are subject to gravitational perturbations by the Sun, Earth, and Moon. If Skynet 1A had failed at its operational location of around 40 east, we would now expect it to be oscillating by plus or minus 35 degrees either side of 75 east, satellite system engineer Dr. Stuart Eaves explains in a blog post for the Global Network on Sustainability in Space. Except it isn't. According to the UK registry, Skynet 1A is currently sitting very close to the bottom of the other well at 105 west, oscillating by just a couple of degrees. The spacecraft is not where it's supposed to be, according to what we know about orbits, now some 36,000 kilometers above the Americas. At some point in the intervening years, the satellite has likely been moved, but nobody appears to know when, who, or why. Tracking of the satellite has been patchy, particularly in the mid-1970s, when the maneuver appears to have taken place, and any records of what happened appear to have been lost. The satellite, though the UK's first, was built and partially operated by the USA, with both countries sending commands to it. A Skynet team from Oakhanger would go to the United States Air Force facility in Sunnyvale, colloquially known as the Blue Cube, and operate Skynet during Oakout. Rachel Hill, a PhD student from University College London searching the National Archives for clues, told the BBC. This was when control was temporarily transferred to the U.S., while Oakhanger was down for essential maintenance. Perhaps the move could have happened then. While an interesting mystery as to who fired it and why, it could become more pressing in the future. In its current orbit, the satellite could pose problems for other nearby satellites in geostationary orbit. Should it collide with another, the question of who issued the order to fire the satellite's thrusters could decide which country is held liable for the ensuing damage.
This Week in Amateur Radio is heard on nets and repeater systems all around the U.S. and around the world on great operations like WA0RCR, from the center of the U.S., Wentzville, Missouri, where This Week in Amateur Radio is proud to be part of the legendary Gateway 160-meter net report each weekend. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425 DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you would like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and all our news team around the world, this is Will Rogers, K5WLR in Fayetteville, Arkansas, wishing you 73.